When the billionaire mocked, the janitor's amazing piano skills transformed everything instantly. Thomas leaned against the cold wall of the empty conference room, staring at that old, neglected piano. Dust had settled over its intricate carvings, but he had poured his heart into its keys more times than he could count. With his hands trembling slightly, he pictured the polished floors of Harrington Associates filled with the city's elite. The gala was only hours away, and Richard Harrington's mocking laughter from earlier echoed in his mind. What does a janitor know about ambition? The billionaire had sneered at a team meeting, eyes scanning past Thomas as though he were invisible. In that moment, Thomas had felt the heat rush to his cheeks, the bittersweet sting of shame curling in his stomach. The prestigious careers of the firm's partners weighed down on him like an oppressive cloud. He had worked tirelessly for over a decade, and yet, in the eyes of the firm's elite, he was just a ghost, forever trapped in the shadows. As he mopped the floors, each sweep of the drenched cloth sent remnants of the day's mockery swirling into the corners. Thomas dared to dream of showcasing his talent, but the thought was quickly consumed by doubt. What if he failed? What if Richard's laughter echoed louder than the chords he played? The solemn responsibility he felt to his family's sacrifices pressed against his chest, heavier with each passing moment. They had worked so hard for him to have this stable position, one that now felt like chains rather than a foundation. His mind raced, weighing the improvised opportunities he dreamt of alongside the stark reality of his role. He wanted to showcase the music that flowed through him, but even thinking of stepping into the spotlight sent a chill down his spine. What if the crowd mocked him? What if he fell short? The piano called to him like a siren, promising solace but also threatening exposure. He stared at the dust, the lingering fears embedding themselves deeper. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The anticipation heightened in his gut as the gala approached. He put away the mop and wiped his brow. Faith wobbled in endlessly, threading between the desire to perform and the fear of ridicule. Each night spent practicing was a double-edged sword, where every note he played comforted him while also teasing the darkness of self-doubt. The evening air thickened with tension the moment the first guests arrived, the buzz of rich laughter drowning out his resolve. Richard's voice led a toast, dismissal of ordinary lives engulfing the room. It was in that moment, exposed and vulnerable, he felt an unfathomable urge push against his ribs. He yearned to be seen, truly seen, to transform the snickers into applause, to breathe life into the silence of his struggles that he could no longer ignore the voice that whispered from within boldly, if not recklessly, demanding to be unleashed. Thomas knew he stood on the precipice, facing a choice: retreat into the safety of anonymity or rise against the odds. Grit surged through him, and he knew the piano awaited his answer. Thomas took a deep breath, centering himself as he approached the piano. The dilapidated instrument stood resolute against the backdrop of the posh gala, a testament to resilience amidst the glitter of wealth. He could hear laughter and clinking glasses echoing from the adjacent hall, and every sound pulled him closer to a tipping point. The moment he sat down at the piano, a magnetic tension sparked in the air. The audience was unaware of the brilliance their ears were about to encounter. All they saw was a janitor, a mere servant in their extravagant world. He felt the weight of their gaze, but this time, it was different. There was purpose behind it. The mocking words of Richard Harrington faded into a dim memory, replaced by an urgent calling to prove himself not only to others but to himself. With trembling fingers, he lifted his hand to the keys. As he pressed down, a vibration surged through him, igniting the dormant embers of his passion. Each note resonated like the beating of his heart, awakening something profound within. He began to play an arrangement he knew by heart. It flowed like a river, carrying him away from reality and into a realm where his anxieties held no sway. The music blended seamlessly, filling the room with depth and emotion. Subtle but breathtaking, his performance unfurled like a blossom in spring. He poured painstaking years of unrecognized talent into those keys, feeding each note with unvoiced frustrations and hopes. The room, which once felt like an oppressive arena of judgment, transformed into a space where every note was a plea, a declaration of his existence, a campaign to shatter the perception of invisibility that plagued him. That he could feel the shift as startled murmurs turned into rapt attention. Guests paused mid-laughter, their conversations dissolving into melodic silence. Thomas dared to glance up, catching sight of unfamiliar faces transfixed by his heartfelt melody. He spotted Richard, annoyance beginning to morph into something resembling intrigue, a begrudging acknowledgement of the talent projected in front of him. With every crescendo, he saw his own reflection, not just the janitor sweeping floors but a man infusing life into silenced dreams. The symphony reached its zenith, and an unexpected, uncontainable passion surged through him. This was more than just music, it was testament to his perseverance, a celebration of the human spirit that transcends skin-deep judgments. As the last note lingered in the air, it dissolved into a stunned silence before erupting into thunderous applause. The euphoric rush coursing through Thomas held the power to redefine everything he had ever believed about himself. He stood, hands poised over the keys, feeling accomplished yet unsettled. In that thunderous response, the daunting question nearly consuming him returned like a specter: what came next? He had stepped into the light, but this newfound recognition bred uncertainty. Could he maintain momentum, keep building a life rich with purpose and dignity? Could he forge a new path despite the swirling chaos of expectations and judgments around him? He savored the applause for a moment longer before allowing himself to leave the piano, navigating through a sea of congratulatory remarks and astonished stares. Confidence surged through him, doubt was a distant whisper. Yet, with every thank you he offered, a flicker of anxiety remained. In the corner of a lavish hall, Thomas caught Richard's eye, a challenge like no other glimmering within the billionaire's gaze. The moment of engagement sparked a realization. This was an unanticipated battlefield where talent met skepticism, and he was ready for the duel that awaited him. The stage had been set, but the next round was yet to begin. The time had come to face the powerful forces that had belittled him for far too long. As the applause began to fade, a new tension gripped Thomas's heart as if it were a vice. The cheers were a sweet nectar, yet beneath the surface lay a complicated amalgam of hope, anticipation, and rising fear. Each commendation hung above him like a weight, urging him to perform, to evolve, to solidify this moment into something more than a fluke of circumstance. That he scanned the room, noting the expressions on the faces of the guests. Where once they had regarded him with disdain, their eyes now shimmered with curiosity and respect. A small victory, yes, but it felt dangerously fragile. With Richard's gaze still fixed on him, a prickle of apprehension surged through his chest. This was not merely a moment of recognition, it was a gauntlet thrown at his feet. Returning to the back of the hall, he felt the shifting dynamics alter the environment around him. The grand chandeliers, reflecting facets of light, felt almost mocking in their opulence against the mundane background of his ordinary existence. He realized these moments were not an invitation to revel in victory, rather, they were the opening act in a far larger performance that required greater finesse. As he moved through the throng, a handful of guests approached him, eager to express their admiration. Thomas was gracious, responding with carefully measured words. Yet internally, a question wrapped around his mind: what did they really see in him? An artist? A curiosity? Or just a fleeting entertainment piece for a lavish evening? It was a disconcerting mix of recognition and doubt. That in the corner, Richard awaited him with arms crossed, the epitome of skepticism yet tinged with intrigue. Thomas took a deep breath and walked toward him. Each step echoed with the weight of unspoken challenges. This was the moment where appearances mattered little, this was the arena where his resolve would be tested. Impressive, Richard began, his voice low and smooth yet brimming with a sharp edge. Who would have thought our janitor had such talent? The derision was cloaked in casual observation, yet each word cut deeper than Thomas anticipated. Tell me, how does it feel to move from cleaning floors to captivating an audience? Like a breath of fresh air after being underwater, Thomas replied, surprising even himself with the clarity of his response. He sensed that the tide was turning, that the moment had arrived for him to confront the condescension head-on. Richard laughed lightly, a sound devoid of warmth. Fresh air. More like the false euphoria of a one-hit wonder. Tell me, what is your plan now? Will you take this moment and vanish, or is there more to it? The challenge was unmistakable. Richard wasn't seeking answers, he was baiting him, hoping to reveal any fissures in Thomas's newfound confidence. But there was more beneath the surface now. He had tasted the music, the passion, and the validation of his existence. Quintessentially, he wanted to change the narrative, move beyond being a spectacle confined by others' perceptions. "I'm just getting started," Thomas said, and in that moment, he realized the conviction behind his words wasn't mere bravado, it poured from a place of deep yearning. He knew he could not return to obscurity. "I want to play, to create, to tell stories through music that people remember. This is just the beginning." Richard's eyes narrowed, calculating. "You think you can transform from janitor to artist? You're stepping into a world where talent is often drowned by privilege. It's all risk, isn't it?" Thomas countered, feeling a spark of determination igniting. "And sometimes, the most unexpected voices become the loudest." With that exchange, he felt a decisive shift, like shifting gears in a vehicle he had never dared to drive. Thomas realized he was no longer just a man with a talent, he was a contender ready to reshape his destiny. Yet, as he turned from Richard, exhilaration coursed through him, tempered by a subtle reminder that the road ahead would demand resilience and resolve. As he stepped back into the crowd, a single thought consumed him: would he be able to gather his fragmented ambitions, face the unseen obstacles, and carve out a place where he belonged? The melody of his journey lingered like a whispered promise. His instincts tugged toward the piano again, an instrument turned into a sanctuary. Unbeknownst to him, the next notes he played could redefine everything, not just for himself but for those who doubted him. The path ahead unfolded like an uncharted score, teeming with both promise and peril. What awaited Thomas in the rhythm of challenges yet unimaginable? The answer lingered tantalizingly close, like the edge of a note yet to be played. The air crackled with an unshakable urgency as Thomas approached the piano, a blend of excitement and dread swirling within him. Each step felt heavier, an increasing weight of expectations pressing against his chest. The polished surface of the instrument reflected his determined expression, a mirror to the shifting dynamics of his own journey. As he sat, his fingers hovered above the keys, betraying the anxiety brewing beneath. Would this be his moment to falter or flourish? Could he truly command the attention that had once seemed so elusive? Breathing deeply, he recalled the exhilaration of performing, a feeling akin to flight, one he could not let slip away again. The first notes burst forth, resonating through the hall with an unexpected confidence. The melodies flowed from his soul, each chord a story of struggle and triumph woven together by his innate talent. With the audience now wrapped around every note, he dared to push his boundaries, experimenting with improvisation and expression. As he lost himself in the music, the boundary between Thomas the janitor and Thomas the artist blurred, allowing passion to take the lead. Encouraged by the response from the crowd, a mix of gasps and murmurs of approval, he ventured into complex orchestrations, threading together memories of his past struggles against the vibrant notes dancing through the air. He could sense the shift. He was no longer performing for mockery, he was creating a connection, fostering a deeper understanding of his narrative through every poignant phrase. But as his fingers glided over the keys, the image of Richard lingered in his mind. The sharp skepticism in Richard's voice replayed like a loop, echoing through his resolve. Would this moment truly transform his life from that of a janitor to something more? Would it silence the critics who awaited his inevitable crash? With each phrase played, Thomas felt a growing determination to face the doubters. For the first time, he envisioned a clear pathway to what lay beyond this performance. A vision sparked in him, a pursuit of mastery, an evolution from mere improvisation to crafting sophisticated compositions that would tell his story long after the last note faded. Yet, realization dawned with a tinge of fear. This no longer just involved creating art but also confronting the reality of pursuing it as a career. Could he venture into the unknown, break free from the chains of his current existence, and seek the challenges that lay beyond the sanctity of this piano? The notes hit their crescendo, and for an instant, he felt invincible. But suddenly, a twinge of doubt entered his mind. How would he sustain this momentum? What if this performance wasn't enough? The final note hung in the air, a suspended moment that begged for resolution. As the applause erupted, Thomas stood, breathless not from the exertion of the performance, but from the weight of the future resting on his shoulders. He scanned the room again, catching the eye of Richard, whose expression had shifted from derision to something closer to grudging admiration. Did this mark the beginning of acceptance? Did it signal an impending challenge or a true ally? As the audience began to disperse, Thomas felt an unyielding urgency surge through him. He knew he needed to take action. Whether that meant reaching out to those who had shown interest or stepping out of the shadows into something greater, the time to act was now. The whispers of possibilities danced in his mind, urging him forward. But what would the first step be? Would he embrace the risks of pursuing formal training or leap into the fray of showcasing his talent in public venues? The answer tantalized the edges of his consciousness, lingering just out of reach. The stakes were rising, and as he left the stage, Thomas's heart raced with both fear and anticipation. He was ready to confront whatever lay ahead. But little did he know that the next challenge was lurking in the wings, waiting to test not only his talents but the very essence of who he had become. As Thomas descended from the stage, the adrenaline still coursed through his veins, mingling with the growing sense of resolve. He could hear scattered applause fading, but one thing remained starkly present: the seed of ambition planted deep within him. Instead of succumbing to the usual post-performance haze, he harbored something more powerful: a determination to seize control of his own destiny. Before the echoes of applause dissipated completely, he spotted Richard weaving through the thinning crowd, his earlier skepticism now softened by what Thomas had just unveiled. There was no denying that the corner of Richard's mouth twitched into a faint smile, a subtle acknowledgement that challenged Thomas to rise higher. "Not bad, janitor," Richard said, half teasing, half complimentary, tipping his head slightly in appreciation. It was unsought validation, yet it struck a chord deep within Thomas. "You've moved beyond gasps and sneers." Could acceptance from Richard serve as a catalyst, pushing him to further explore his untapped potential? While he'd spent years sweeping away memories, dulled by the constant shadows of doubt, he found himself at a crossroads, looking finally toward the future. "Thank you," Thomas replied, surprising even himself with the assertiveness in his voice. He understood now that feedback, whether positive or otherwise, could be a guide. The audience had morphed from faceless watchers into a collective force that recognized his artistic expression, contrasting dramatically with his past experiences of disdain. That same audience could potentially open doors both literally and metaphorically. The energy was contagious, compelling him to consider the next steps. As he exited the venue, a sense of urgency washed over him, each pulse resonating along with the beat of his ambitions. What weighed heavily on Thomas's mind was clarity: he must carve his own path. The decision loomed large. Reinventing himself by pursuing formal training at a prestigious music school or diving headfirst into performances at local cafes and community events, each held their own enigmatic allure. "The choice is yours," he whispered to himself, internalizing those words as motivation. In the weeks that followed, Thomas began the grind of dissecting what he wanted from life versus what others expected. He spent nights drafting meticulous plans, using old composition lessons as blueprints for his new ambitions. The piano had become more than an instrument; it was a vessel carrying him toward possibility. Long nights turned into mornings of diligence, each hour melded into a symphony of purpose. One evening, while revisiting his childhood pieces, Thomas caught a flicker of something that had long escaped his grasp. A voice in his compositions grew stronger, transforming from his past struggles to resonant expressions of who he was becoming. Each piece uncovered a hidden talent. He realized he could channel personal narratives into his music, infusing depth with each note, but despite progress, uncertainty gnawed at him. Making the leap from janitor to full-fledged artist, could he really do it? He often stayed awake imagining the worst-case scenarios, from failures to null responses, and each one felt more daunting than the last. Yet amid these thoughts, a burgeoning belief began to unfurl. What if he faced judgment not as a victim but as an artist ready to reclaim his space? The urgent question remained: would he act? Would he let fear curtail his evolution? With determination stealing his resolve, he set a date for his first public showcase outside of the earlier concert, a local venue known for its intimate performances. Days stretched into frantic preparations, and as he polished his pieces, he could sense that fate, instead of mere happenstance, was beckoning him toward confrontation. As he stood before the mirror, preparing to step into the unknown, a familiar echo rippled through him, an amalgamation of courage and trepidation merging into potential. The stage awaited this time, not as a timid janitor but as a poised artist. And the next challenge, more formidable than any before, loomed large, its answer concealed beneath the keys of his own making. The moment to redefine his identity was at hand. But little did he know that lurking behind the curtain of acceptance was a figure who would push him further than he expected, shedding light on darker corners of his artistry. The question persisted: would he embrace the truth when it finally emerged? Thomas paced back and forth in his small apartment, the weight of anticipation mixing uneasily with his doubts. The day of the showcase loomed like an urgent storm cloud, casting shadows over his burgeoning confidence. Each step across the worn wooden floor echoed the mantra he had been repeating for weeks: "You are more than what they see." He glanced at the piano, its surface gleaming beneath the single light bulb hanging overhead. What used to be an outlet for childish expression had morphed into an instrument of self-rediscovery. Thoughts of Richard's half-smile replayed in his mind, nudging him to push aside the fear of failure. But what if tonight was just another opportunity to stumble? An unsettling chill crept down his spine. "Focus," he muttered, willing himself to breathe deeper. Thoughts of rejection lingered tantalizingly close, yet a counterforce flickered within him, fueled by the echoes of those who had applauded his last performance. What had shifted beneath his skin? The hunger for self-validation had ignited a desire not just to perform, but to express something profound, a truth he hoped would resonate with others. As he prepared his pieces, memories flooded back, each struggle and triumph accompanying his growth as an artist. Drafting plans for future performances, he realized he not only had to convince others of his talent, he needed to convince himself. That realization was both empowering and daunting. When Thomas arrived at the venue, he was immediately consumed by an intoxicating mix of excitement and anxiety. The quaint café buzzed with anticipation. He could see familiar faces among the crowd, but his gaze landed on a different presence: a man sitting alone at a table, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, exuding confidence that bordered on arrogance. The man was Jack, a local financier known for his sharp tongue and even sharper critiques. Thomas's heart raced as he took the stage, the weight of Jack's piercing eyes scrutinizing him. Would tonight be yet another chance for mockery? The thought tightened his chest. But as he sat down and placed his hands over the keys, he remembered the narrative he had uncovered, the voice that had emerged from his past. He was no longer merely a janitor, he was an artist ready to rise. With the first note, he felt an electric jolt of connection weave through the space. Each chord was a pulse igniting memories and emotions, battles fought within his mind, personal losses laid bare, and the resolve that had finally catalyzed his journey. As the music soared, he took a risk, straying from the familiar pieces to infuse original compositions that flowed with raw energy. With each passing moment, he shed the remnants of a timid psyche, unveiling a part of himself that craved recognition. The audience shifted slightly, faces transforming from passive observers to captivated listeners. Jack's expression initially hardened, but Thomas noticed the flicker of curiosity begin to spark in his eyes, yet amidst the growing intensity of the moment, a familiar trepidation gnawed at Thomas. What if this performance didn't resonate? Would he only succeed in proving Jack's initial judgments right? As he wound through the final notes, the energy in the room shimmered, casting a spell over the crowd. Release. The applause that burst forth was thunderous, heavy with appreciation. For a brief moment, he believed he existed beyond the role he'd been assigned, an artist, a creator, finally multiplying his worth beyond the title of janitor. But when Thomas glanced towards Jack, seeking acknowledgement, he found the man staring back, arms crossed, the corners of his mouth tilting into a challenging smirk. This was no endorsement, it was a dare. "Nice try," Jack mouthed silently, the challenge laden with condescension. The elation of the performance collided with the sharp sting of doubt. Would he let Jack's mockery define him? As the moment settled, Thomas felt a flicker of defiance. Perhaps this was not the end but merely a prelude. What lay ahead was still uncertain, but now he understood that his journey had just begun. How far would he be willing to go to redefine not only his artistry but also the malicious narratives imposed by others? This was just the first act, and the call for a defining confrontation was imminent. Thomas stood in a haze of applause, the raw sound of appreciation wrapping around him like a warm embrace. But as quickly as it arrived, the moment was overshadowed by Jack's smirk, which now felt like a brick wall slamming against the fragile walls Thomas had constructed around his newfound confidence. He could almost hear the other skeptics whispering through the bustling café, judging him based on Jack's assessment, a feeling that morphed into a sharp need to change that narrative. His fingers trembled as he collected his music sheets, shoving them into an old, scuffed bag. The roar of the audience seemed to fade into the background as he began to replay the performance in his mind. What had he done? Had it been enough? The sheer freedom he felt while playing dissipated into a cacophony of second-guessing. The echoes of Jack's slight, the condescension embodied by that lazy smirk, spurred something dangerously compelling within him. "You have to keep going," he whispered to himself, stepping off the stage and spilling back into the audience. There was a surge of energy as patrons erupted into conversation about the performance, the lingering whispers punctuated by Thomas's pounding heart. He had captured something that night, transcending mere notes, and he was unwilling to allow Jack's assertion to undermine that. Defiance bubbled beneath his skin, igniting ambitions he hadn't fully formulated yet. He glanced back at Jack, who sat sipping his drink, clearly enticed by the spectacle. It was toxic, but at that moment, Thomas wanted to confront it, to dare and embark on a quest of growth rather than remain confined within existing limits. Days passed, a whirlwind of self-reflection interlaced with determination. He practiced feverishly, allowing the emotions dug up by his performance to guide him. No longer did he play out of obligation or habit, now he played to discover the fullness of his being. Each piece became a revelation, pulling fragments from the deepest recesses of his soul. With every practice session, he began to compose a new piece inspired by the unrelenting tension between ambition and self-doubt, intending it as both his shield and his sword. This was no longer just about proving Jack wrong, it was about dismantling the self-imposed barriers that had shackled him for years. He would practice until the cords bled from his fingers, reinforcing his identity as an artist, his clarity sharpened as each note rang through the air. He took mental notes on pieces he thought would elevate him beyond the casual perceptions of others. The fear of inadequacy transformed into a catalyst for meticulous craftsmanship. He began to imagine situations he would confront, perhaps even a direct confrontation with Jack, if that what it took. One evening, after a night of ripping through compositions, he isolated a fragment of melody that curled sweetly at the edges of his memory, reminiscent of childhood innocence and warmth. He played and replayed it, over and over, until it became a poignant element of his newer, bolder work. His piece came to symbolize more than simply music. It became the narrative of his resilience, punctuated by the challenge posed by Jack.as. The tension in his heart swelled, a plan formed alongside the music fueled not just by a defiant rage, but by a burgeoning sense of purpose. If he ever met Jack again, he wouldn't just play for validation, he would confront the very notions that restrained him. Little did Thomas know, opportunity would soon stare him down, beckoning him out of the shadows and into a world that would irrevocably test his growth. Just days later, he received a message that shook him to the core. Someone wanted him to play at an upcoming showcase, hosted by none other than Jack himself. The moment of truth had arrived. Would he step into the spotlight again, ready to redefine himself, or would he retreat into the lingering shadows of his past? When the message arrived, a wave of adrenaline coursed through Thomas. A showcase, hosted by Jack, would not just be a chance for recognition, it would be an arena for transformation. The gravity of the situation pressed against him, a heavy cloak of expectations and fears that he could almost taste. That he sat at his piano, the keys feeling like an extension of his very being as he pondered the implications. This was more than just an opportunity to play, it was a confrontation with every ounce of doubt he had harbored. Yet the familiar pulse of ambition surged within him, a countercurrent that promised to break the surface of his self-imposed limitations. For days, he prepared. The new piece became a living entity, growing more intricate and powerful with each passing hour. It was an evolution of all that he had experienced, the sting of Jack's derision mixed with the ecstatic realization of his own artistic voice. He poured blood, sweat, and tears into expressing this struggle, convinced that the rawness of his creation would resonate. As he rehearsed, he noticed a shift within himself. The subtle twitch of his fingers as he played, effortlessly gliding over the keys, the sound that spilled from the piano was a mix of joy and defiance. Each note unveiled a part of his inner landscape, the childhood memories, the longing for validation, and a fierce desire to prove himself. Yet, just as quickly, he could feel the shadows whispering words of doubt, reminding him of Jack, the smirk, the prior insecurities. "You can't hide forever." The words felt like daggers, piercing through moments of light joy. But then, amidst the self-doubt, there emerged a flicker of realization. He would not hide, rather, he would now stand before Jack unapologetically. This was his statement, a declaration of identity. Nights turned into a blur of practice, driven by the rhythmic heartbeat of the music. Thomas found himself losing track of time, immersed in the energy that surged from the act of creation. With every rehearsal, not only did he develop the piece, but he also unearthed deeper layers of himself, a boldness that had been submerged for too long. As the date drew near, he faced paradoxical fears, trembling excitement shadowed by a haunting dread. Each time he replayed the melody, he questioned whether he had truly dug deep enough. Was the piece powerful enough to silence the smirks and doubts? Would it resonate beyond just the notes? The morning of the showcase arrived, the world outside bright and bustling, yet Thomas found himself cloaked in a storm of uncertainty. He could see Jack's name on the promotional materials, bold and unapologetic, a direct challenge to his resolve. But instead of being deterred, Thomas felt a flicker of determination surge through him. It ignited an urge to rise above the judgments, to seize the moment and command the narrative. Walking into the venue sent a rush of mixed feelings. The air hummed with anticipation, vibrating against his skin. Patrons mingled, laughter floated through the air, and there was Jack, exuding almost a palpable confidence as he interacted with others. The sight served as a reminder this was about confronting the skepticism, stepping into the arena not just as a performer but as an artist armed with self-awareness. When it was finally time to take the stage, his breath quickened, but he refused to succumb to the fear that clawed at him. He caught Jack's eye for just a split second, a reminder of everything at stake. The weight of expectation was a tether that tied him to both vulnerability and strength. As he settled at the piano, his fingers poised above the keys, he recalled every practice session, every thread of the melody woven with intention and emotion. This wasn't just a performance, it was a reconciliation. With the first note, he propelled himself forward, both unearthing the tumult within and showcasing the growth that had brought him to this moment. But moments before he embraced the unfolding melody, a shadow crossed his mind. Had he truly prepared enough? What if this time, Jack's feedback caused more harm than good? The tension hung in the air like thick fog, suffocating yet charged with potential. The moment had come. With the seductive assurance of music wrapped around him, Thomas was poised between triumph and despair. What awaited him on the other side? Would he emerge transformed or retreat to silence once more? As the piano resonated with the first stroke, he knew there was no turning back now. The sound of the piano echoed, filling the room with a rich tapestry of notes, both haunting and vibrant. Thomas played, allowing his emotions to spill into the music as if each note were a brushstroke painting a vivid picture of his journey. Yet, as the familiar melody flowed, he couldn't ignore the internal battle raging within him. The spotlight felt scorching, and Jack's presence loomed large, a specter of doubt and the embodiment of past criticisms. With each chord, he began to evacuate the anxieties that had clung persistently to his ribs. There was an undeniable beauty in transforming personal conflict into art. It was liberating. For the first time, Thomas understood his music was not merely an escape, but a confrontation. He played for himself, not for applause or the approval of those who stood to judge. His fingers danced across the keys with newfound confidence, merging vulnerability with power, and yet, Jack's harsh voice echoed in the recesses of his mind. "You are nothing without validation." There was a grit to the words, a mockery that bore down on him like a weight, and for a fleeting moment, it threatened to unravel everything he had worked so hard to build. The melody stumbled, faltering beneath the pressure of doubt. But in that instant, Thomas recognized the defeat simmering deep inside him. This was precisely what he feared, being defined by others, particularly by someone who discarded him so easily. Struggling against this tide, he shifted his approach. He focused on the fundamentals of his composition, returning to the core of what drove him to create. The piano's keys felt like a lifeline now, each touch grounding him in the present. This was his moment. The audience was not simply a crowd, but a canvas ready to embrace his narrative. He intensified his playing, leaning into his emotions, pouring his experiences into the piece as he tended to the raw nerves laid bare by his performance. In the depths of his concentration, Thomas began to hear his inner voice. It spoke of resilience, of taking control of his narrative, refusing to let influential voices dictate his worth. This was not Jack's story, it was his. The sounds resonating from the piano morphed into an anthem, encapsulating every ounce of hope and despair he had endured, all blended into a swirling crescendo that transformed fear into fierce determination. As he neared the climax of the piece, exhilaration coursed through him. His fear had transformed into a fire that fueled his fingers, the music electrifying the space around him. He hammered each note with an intensity that pushed aside the shadows of doubt. Thomas envisioned Jack, but this time, instead of derision, he summoned the image of acceptance and acknowledgement. The final chords flourished, echoing through the venue and rebounding against the walls. He drew in a breath. The last note hung in the air like a suspended drop of water. In that moment, he felt unshackled, as if he had emerged from under the heavy weight he had so long carried. He had embraced the paradox of performance, vulnerability and strength, doubt and conviction, but as the applause erupted and he took a bow, the initial surge of joy mingled with a rising tide of uncertainty. What would Jack's reaction be now? Would the feedback, when given, shatter the newfound confidence he had painstakingly built in such a fragile moment? The rhythm of triumph intertwined with anxious anticipation as he stepped off stage, wrestling with the reality that lay ahead. The evening was just beginning, and so many unanswered questions loomed. What would Jack say as the critic was offered his feedback? Would this moment solidify Thomas's rebirth, or would it serve as another reminder of the insecurities that had lingered all too long? The anticipation was palpable, and the stakes had never felt higher. Thomas stepped off the stage, adrenaline still surging through him like electricity. The applause faded, but the warmth of recognition lit an undeniable flame in his heart. For the first time, he felt an authentic connection not just with the audience but with himself. The music he'd just played wasn't merely an expression, it was his declaration of resilience, a solidified identity that transcended the shadows of others' perceptions. As he moved through the crowd, familiar faces echoed admiration, but it was Jack's stance that loomed large in his mind. Would the local financier still wear that smug smile? Thomas locked eyes with him, half expecting the usual mockery. Instead, Jack appeared contemplative, the curiosity in his gaze unsettling. Doubt flickered in Thomas's chest. Had he achieved enough to finally redefine his path? Amidst the swirling cacophony of celebration, he discerned the need to consolidate his identity, to sustain this momentum that felt too precious to slip away. He approached Jack, navigating through a maze of attendees eager to congratulate him, yet aware of the gravity of confronting his greatest critic. Good performance, Jack acknowledged, his tone devoid of sarcasm, though masked with an air of control. But music alone won't carry you far in this industry. Talent needs a stage, and you'll have to prove you're more than a momentary spark. Thomas stood before Jack, breath heavy yet determined. "I've proved I can stand up in front of an audience," he replied with conviction. "Now I need to learn how to navigate this world, make a career out of it." Jack's eyebrows lifted slightly, an indication of intrigue surfacing amidst his calculated exterior. So you're willing to embrace the challenges. It's not merely about talent, you need strategy. You have to know people, and understand the business. In that moment, Thomas felt an awakening. He was not just a janitor showing up to an impromptu performance, he was an artist ready to embrace both artistry and professionalism. I want to learn, to grow beyond this moment. If I can create music that resonates, then I can face whatever business hurdles await, he asserted, embodying a newfound confidence. With a nod, Jack leaned forward, a hint of respect surfacing. Then let us talk. I may know a few connections in the industry that could help you. But once you're in, there's no backing down. The offer was a pivotal moment. Thomas had conquered the fear that once held him captive, now he was prepared to take the steps necessary to both create and sustain his artistic identity. He could shape not only his narrative but his future as well. Days turned into weeks filled with collaborations, meetings, and studio sessions that pushed the boundaries he once was too afraid to explore. With Jack's guidance, he saw the industry through a new lens, not just as daunting but as an opportunity to craft a legacy. Recognition turned into tangible achievements as Thomas performed at local venues, gained traction through social media, and even received invitations to workshops that honed his skills. He transformed his raw talent into crafted artistry, each session bridging the gap between dreamer and doer. Attending music events became part of his routine. He networked with ambitious artists and producers, basking in the creative dialogue that fueled his passion. Each connection felt like an affirmation of self-worth he had long craved. The deep-seated feeling of invisibility ebbed away with each milestone. Months later, Thomas found himself standing in a recording studio, preparing to record his first EP. The tension was palpable, but it did not invoke fear. Instead, he embraced it. The culmination of struggles transformed into a concrete project was exhilarating. This was no longer about proving Richard Harrington or Jack wrong, it was about affirming his journey. He was more than a janitor, he was an emerging artist, an entrepreneur, and above all, a testament to perseverance. As the first notes unveiled, he let himself sink into the melody, each chord a reminder of who he was, who he had become, and everything he aimed to achieve. The recording flowed seamlessly, each take more powerful than the last. It was a true representation of his transformation from uncertainty to assuredness. When they completed the last recording, elation washed over him, a palpable sense of pride coursing through every fiber of his being. As the team wrapped up, Thomas learned that his EP would feature an instrumental of the very piece that had first showcased his talent at the gala. It felt like a poetic circle of life. What had initially represented fear was now cemented as his identity. On the day of the release, Thomas stood in front of a diverse crowd, largely unfamiliar faces, and felt invincible. The anticipatory silence gripped hold as he took the stage once more. But this time, the apprehension didn't weigh him down, instead, it buoyed him. He breathed deeply, prepared to share the music that was now undeniably his. In that moment, Thomas understood something profound. He had not just conquered a performance, he had built a life that showcased resilience and creativity. The journey had molded him, transformed him from a silent witness of dreams into a bold creator of them. And as the applause washed over him, it was not merely a reflection of the audience's appreciation, it was a testament to his relentless spirit and embodiment of his evolution. He had arrived. Now is the time for you to be part of Thomas's journey. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and support the narrative of overcoming adversity. Comment below with your reactions, insights, or theories about Thomas's journey and the challenges you faced. And don't wait even one more second to share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to hear this story of personal achievement. Show your support for those who dare to rise.